The nurse slid the clipboard across the counter without looking up, asking me to finish the emergency paperwork because my roommate's hands were shaking too badly to hold a pen. My heart was already racing from the terrifying drive through the rain, the red lights we barely made, and the sound of her struggling to breathe beside me. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy. I wasn't trying to learn anything I wasn't supposed to know. But when I reached the section labeled Relationship to Patient, I froze. Under my name, in her own shaky handwriting, she had written just 3 words that changed everything I thought I knew. She hadn't written roommate. She hadn't written friend. She had written, the person I love. In that single moment, the noisy waiting room disappeared, the fluorescent lights blurred, and I realized I had been living beside someone whose heart had been quietly breaking every single day, while pretending everything was perfectly normal. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more emotional stories that remind us how powerful love and compassion can truly be. When I first met Ava, she wasn't the kind of person who walked into a room demanding attention. She was the type who quietly made everyone else's lives easier without expecting anything in return. We became roommates because neither of us could afford a place on our own after college. It wasn't some magical friendship at first. It was practical. We split the rent, divided grocery bills, labeled shelves in the refrigerator, and politely stayed out of each other's way. But life has a strange habit of bringing people together through ordinary routines. We learned each other's coffee orders, favorite movies, and stressful habits. She always left encouraging sticky notes on the refrigerator before my job interviews. I fixed her old laptop every time it crashed. We celebrated birthdays with cheap cupcakes from the grocery store and laughed until midnight watching terrible movies neither of us actually enjoyed. Somewhere along the way, our apartment stopped feeling like a rental and started feeling like home. I never noticed how much of that home existed because of her. She remembered every important date in my life. She stocked my favorite cereal before I even realized we were out. When I caught the flu, she stayed awake through the night, changing cold towels on my forehead. She claimed she simply cared about people that way, and I believed her because kindness seemed to flow naturally from her. I didn't realize that every thoughtful gesture carried feelings she never expected me to return. Looking back now, I can see hundreds of moments that should have told me the truth, but I was too distracted by my own life to notice. My own heart had been trapped somewhere else. For nearly 2 years, I chased someone who loved attention more than honesty. Every time that relationship fell apart, Ava quietly picked up the emotional pieces without criticizing my terrible decisions. She never told me I deserved better. She simply reminded me that someday I'd find someone who saw my worth. I thought those words came from friendship. I never imagined they came from hope. Hope that one day I might finally look up and notice the person standing beside me all along. The morning everything changed began like every other weekday. Ava insisted she was only tired. She laughed when I suggested staying home from work. But around lunchtime, she texted me a single sentence saying she couldn't breathe properly. I left my office without asking permission and found her sitting on our kitchen floor, pale as paper, barely able to speak. Panic swallowed every logical thought. I helped her into my car, ignored every speed limit, and prayed silently during the entire drive that I wasn't too late. Urgent care waiting rooms have a strange atmosphere where everyone's lives seem suspended between fear and hope. Children cried softly, televisions played shows nobody watched, and every face carried its own private story. While the nurses examined Ava, I sat alone staring at the clipboard resting on my lap. Filling out forms felt insignificant compared to the fear that something terrible might happen before anyone could help her. Then I reached that single question asking my relationship to the patient. I almost skipped it because I assumed I already knew the answer. But my eyes drifted downward toward the handwriting she had managed to complete before her strength disappeared. There, squeezed into the tiny space beside the question, was the truth she had never spoken aloud. The words looked rushed and uneven, yet heartbreakingly clear. The person I love. I read it again. Then again. I wondered if medication had confused her or if she had accidentally written the wrong thing. But deep inside, another voice whispered that this explained everything I had spent years failing to understand. Every encouraging note, every quiet sacrifice, every birthday surprise, every patient smile after watching me return heartbroken from another failed relationship. She had never asked for anything because she believed loving someone sometimes meant accepting they might never love you back. I couldn't breathe. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing my roommate. I was terrified of losing the person who had quietly become the safest place in my life without me ever realizing it. The doctor eventually returned with reassuring news. Severe dehydration combined with a respiratory infection had caused her collapse, but with medication and rest she would recover. Relief crashed over me so suddenly that I had to sit down before my legs gave out. While Ava slept in the examination room, I remained outside replaying every memory we had ever shared. The more I remembered, the more ashamed I became. Kindness had surrounded me for years, and I had mistaken it for ordinary friendship because I never bothered asking what it might have cost the person giving it. The following week changed the rhythm of our lives completely. I took time off work to care for her the same way she had once cared for me. I cooked terrible soup she politely pretended to enjoy. I reminded her to take medicine on schedule. I cleaned the apartment, bought groceries, and stayed awake listening to make sure her breathing remained steady throughout the night. For the first time, I truly noticed how empty the apartment felt whenever she slept. Her laughter had become part of the walls. Her humming while making breakfast had become the soundtrack of home. Without realizing it, my happiness had quietly attached itself to her presence. Yet I still couldn't bring myself to mention what I had read. I worried that speaking those words aloud would embarrass her. Maybe she had written them during a moment of weakness. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe pretending I never saw them would protect whatever friendship remained. But silence has a way of growing heavier every day. Weeks later, while reorganizing bookshelves together, an old photograph slipped from one of her novels. It showed us during our first Christmas as roommates, wearing ridiculous sweaters and laughing at something outside the frame. She reached to pick it up, smiled sadly, and tucked it back inside without saying anything. That tiny expression lasted only seconds, but it carried years of hidden disappointment. In that moment, I realized silence wasn't protecting either of us anymore. That evening, after dinner, I finally admitted I had seen what she wrote at urgent care. The color disappeared from her face. She apologized before I could even speak, apologizing for making things awkward, apologizing for loving someone who never asked to be loved, apologizing for writing the truth because she thought she might lose consciousness before anyone understood who I was to her. Listening to her apologize for having a heart broke something inside me. She explained she never intended to tell me. She had already accepted that I would probably fall in love with someone else someday. Watching me build a future with another person would hurt, but she believed genuine love meant wanting someone else's happiness even when it excluded your own. There are moments in life when every excuse disappears. No distractions, no uncertainty, only honesty. I realized I had spent years searching for dramatic romance while completely overlooking quiet devotion. I confused excitement with love and overlooked consistency because it wasn't loud enough. Meanwhile, the woman beside me had been demonstrating love every ordinary day through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering kindness. I didn't suddenly fall in love because of what she wrote. I realized I had already been falling in love for years. I simply hadn't recognized the feeling until I almost lost her. Life after that conversation wasn't magically perfect. We moved carefully because neither of us wanted gratitude to be mistaken for romance. We agreed not to rush into labels. We spent months rediscovering each other honestly instead of hiding behind friendship. We went on awkward first dates despite already knowing each other's coffee preferences, embarrassing childhood stories, and favorite comfort foods. We laughed whenever strangers assumed we'd been together forever because, in many ways, our hearts already had been. Love turned out to be surprisingly ordinary. It looked like grocery shopping together. It looked like encouraging each other after difficult workdays. It looked like holding hands during stressful doctor appointments. It looked like forgiveness whenever misunderstandings happened. Most importantly, it looked like finally seeing the person who had always been standing beside you. A year later we returned to that same urgent care center, not because of another emergency, but because we wanted to deliver homemade cookies to the nurses who had cared for Ava. The receptionist smiled politely, unaware she had unknowingly witnessed the beginning of our story. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Ava squeezed my hand and laughed about the terrible handwriting that had accidentally revealed her biggest secret. I smiled because I knew the truth. It wasn't an accident. Sometimes life waits until we're frightened enough to appreciate what has quietly been protecting our hearts all along. If that frightening afternoon had never happened, I might have continued chasing people who only appreciated pieces of me while ignoring the person who cherished every imperfect part. That realization still humbles me. Love doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it quietly washes your dishes, remembers your coffee order, drives you to job interviews, and waits patiently for years hoping you'll finally notice. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need hope today. Special request: before the story ends, please comment with the words, "Love notices kindness." If you believe the strongest relationships are built on patience, compassion, and showing up for each other every single day. Today our apartment looks different. The furniture has changed. The walls wear new paint. There are wedding plans pinned beside grocery lists and vacation ideas stuck to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. But one thing has never changed. Every morning before leaving for work, Ava still leaves small handwritten notes where she knows I'll find them. Sometimes they simply wish me a good day. Sometimes they remind me to eat lunch. Sometimes they just say she believes in me. I keep every single one. Because I finally understand that love isn't measured by grand speeches or perfect moments. It's measured by thousands of quiet acts of kindness repeated so consistently that they become invisible unless someone chooses to truly see them. The greatest tragedy isn't loving someone who doesn't love you back. The greatest tragedy is failing to recognize the person who has been loving you faithfully all along. And if this story teaches anything, let it be this. Never underestimate the quiet people in your life. Sometimes the person listed as your roommate, your friend, or your neighbor is secretly carrying a love strong enough to change your entire future. All it takes is one honest moment, one act of courage, and one open heart to turn an ordinary day into the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of your life.